So the title of the lecture is Ancient Herat, Preserving the Past for the Future, because I think when I thought back to the project and the lecture today, I thought that is an appropriate title about what we did. This is one of the few projects which, as an archaeologist, I think you don't very often have the chance to do. Because it combines so many different aspects which were linked together in the end by a presentation for the general public in the Herat Museum. Now, some may ask why did we work in Herat, which was a rather unexplored region by the time that we started. When we finished our work in Babur in Kabul in 2005, we had already been discussing with the Ministry of Information and Culture in Afghanistan, with whom we are collaborating since 2002 for the projects both in Kabul and also in Herat, with a very close cooperation. With a lot of different institutions, mainly the Institute of Archaeology, the National Museum in Kabul, who is responsible for all museums in the city, the Department of Monuments and Sites, and of course, other agencies who were on site and who sponsors and supported us, like our Hand Trust for Culture and the DAFA in Kabul, with whom we also share a project, as you will hear later on. So Herat at that time, it was subject to a few surveys conducted by Victor Sarianidi at one point of time and other people as well, without producing a lot of archaeological research, I should say, because Herat, of course, was a center for the historic investigation and documentation because of its richness in buildings. So at that time in 2004, the government was thinking of presenting Herat to the tentative UNESCO World Heritage List, and that's why they encouraged us to go there and start our research. And what we ended up with was a fascinating period of many years that lasted from 2004 and 5 up to 2012, actually in the field, and which still goes on until today, with 3 different components. We started with a survey in the province of Herat, which we conducted for 3 years, and started at the same time while the survey was still running, with excavations on the Kala Ishtaruddin, the Citadel Mount of Herat. And in the end, the last project was to bring all of that together in the newly established Herat National Museum. So I will present you the different projects and components of this work. A shared feature for all of them was that not so much the scientific research was in the foreground and the main reason for doing that, but it was the wish to collaborate with the universities, with the different institutions, and to provide some training. Actually, I don't know how many of you know Afghanistan. When we came there first in 2002, it was a very different country than what it was like in 2007, 8, and later on. In 2002 and up to 2006, the university was more or less not properly functioning. We came there, they had no books. Everything was destroyed or gone into flames or looted. It was quite shocking to see. And so the main point of the work, which was also sponsored by the German Foreign Office all the years, was to provide equipment, training, and to prepare documentation. So these were the prime reasons behind our project. And actually, we did not expect the richdom of material finds and the scientific research that we could do. So the reason to go to the hinterland of Herat in the first place was that we thought we need to take the chance to move around in an area which is naturally so varied and so rich in different landscapes, and to investigate what was there. Of course, we were building on a lot of material which was published and collected before, mainly, of course, the Archaeological Gazetteer of Warwick Ball, and all the publications from the previous missions, which provided a very good guidance in that aspect. So by starting the work in 2005, it was also still a little bit unusual for an archaeological survey to be, first of all, aware of mines and security issues, which at that time were still an ongoing threat. So going to the country and to the tracks and leave the tracks into the field was not advisable, because in many areas which were the old like borderlines in war, still a lot of mines were going. So I have to admit that both to the security issues and to the enormous landscapes, we cannot say that our survey was a systematic survey which covered all the ground systematically, and which provides a reliable and rather comprehensive picture of ancient sites and monuments. But what we did was to drive and to walk wherever possible, to go and to see and document sites. So we covered from, except 2 or 3 provinces, which at that time were already not accessible, we covered, at least to a certain part, all of the provinces and districts of Herat. Along also, of course, this would not have been possible with our colleagues, which collaborated with us, many of them, for all the years that we worked in Herat. So, as I mentioned before, one of the components was to document the sites and monuments. That is why we made many plans for the reason to first document the present status of preservation, and then, on the other hand, to preserve the evidence for the future. Some sites, of course, are very well known, like these 2 monuments from Shiste Sharif, which are very famous, but not in a very good state of condition. They have lasted like this for about 100 years, as we can say now. They have been restored by the Department of Monuments and Sites in the past years, and the pictures that you see here now is already something like history. Another thing which was very obvious during our surveys is that I would say that 80% of the sites which we detected were looted, and very often the looted trenches were the guidance, were our guides to lead us there. Being in the field, we usually went to the villages to meet the elders and the heads of the villages and clans, and then they would give us guides and we would go around to document the sites. It was really amazing to see to which extent these sites have already been excavated. What I show you here is a picture of Palgirt. It's very well known, also from Warwick Ball's catalog. It's one of the vast sites which we found. It has a diameter of about 1.2 kilometers, and you can see in the background a citadel, and in the foreground it's part of a very large, almost circular city, and you can see the extent to which it has been excavated. And much of what is in the market, or was in the market in Herat and in Kabul and in adjoining countries, I think comes from this place. So we went there 3 times in all these years, and we selected a lot of pottery and other evidence, and it's really one of the very interesting sites. So the number of places we recorded is 325. We covered these 13 districts, and we drove about 8,000 kilometers on roads and tracks, or walked. And we covered a time frame from about the 3rd millennium BC. The historic period was rather not very well attested. and with many clusters of sites from the dating from the 9th, 10th to the 13th century and to the Timurid and post-Timurid periods. So we have started during the past years, we have worked on publications. One publication is still missing, and that is the survey area, because it is the most comprehensive and in a way most difficult one. I show you here a part of the picture. It's forthcoming actually next year. It really presents the very rich evidence of sites and monuments that we have. And you see here all the red dots, of course, along the routes which we went, which show the distribution of sites. So already in the second year, when we have started our work in collaboration with the DAFA, the Délégation Archaeologique Française in Afghanistan, we started to do a large project in Herat city itself. We did that actually on not only on behalf of the government, which wanted to explore the ancient city for the reason that they wanted to register the city on the tentative heritages, but also, of course, because the Citadel of Herat is one of the most interesting and fascinating sites which you can find in the area. You can see here that it's situated on what appears like a high mount. It's about 12 meters high at places, but it's not all natural, it's not all artificial. It has a natural elevation at this base. An obstacle which occurred to us during our work in Herat was that the whole area of the old city is very, very densely occupied, and it's very difficult to find any open spaces. Or let's say undisturbed and accessible open spaces. So that is the area which you see outlined in red here. It's the old city, which is partly still enclosed by a big city wall. And the citadel is located at its northwestern edge of it. You can see it where the name is written in white. Can't show you something here. Maybe you can see it. This part is the Friday Mosque, the Big Mosque of Herat. The old city center of Herat is so densely occupied that it was not possible to make any larger explorations there. The DAFA took the chance, for example, of new buildings and the construction of monuments to go there and check the pits that were dug to investigate the pits for the evidence. But this has been possible only to a very small extent. So we focused our work on the citadel, which was vacated by the military in 2005, and after mine clearance became more accessible than it had been before. So we could go there and start our excavation in 2005, because of course it's one of the most, not only buildings of the Islamic period, but also being located on a high mount, being very interesting in terms of detecting or investigating the history of Herat. So here I present you another view how the citadel looks. This is the status after the conservation by the latest conservation by Aga Khan, which started in 2008. It has been restored before by the UNESCO in the 70s. But it was in a very bad shape when we started our work, and so this conservation work was conducted by Aga Khan project in 2008 to 2012. I give you here some views of the interior of the citadel and the exterior as it looked when we started working. And here in red, you can see some of the areas where our trenches are located. Some of the buildings are of new date. The other ones, like in the elevated eastern part, date back to the to the 19th century. This is a different view showing the trenches. Of course, it has been possible only to a certain extent to excavate on the citadel. One area was the most interesting one. This is the highest part of the citadel, where the palace of the 19th, 20th century was standing, and the courtyard, a paved courtyard. So we were allowed to remove that and to start our excavation there. This is here in this portion on the citadel. These remains are still standing from the 17th and 18th century, while the parts which are on the lower part of the citadel are more or less new. So I will focus now only on two trenches. This is trench number 1, which was the uppermost part, and trench number 3, which is in the north of the citadel. It was quite surprising, actually, for being an archaeologist to start an excavation digging in areas which are dated to the early 20th, late 19th century, and then after a very short time to come across something that looked very much prehistoric. What you can see here on the screen is the paveyard of the courtyard of the 19th century, and then you see some pits and ditches which are also like 18th century. But starting from a point here where the staircase turns, there was a level of a very solid and massive mud brick platform. And digging through that mud brick platform, we came across a habitation level, which you can see here. And the finds that we have from that clearly indicate that this was not dating to the Islamic, but to the pre-Islamic period. And we have a number of finds and of radiocarbon dates, which show that this occupation dates back to the first millennium BC, the 7th and 6th century most likely. Here you can see a section. We dug the whole trench down in 3 years up to the natural surface, which are silty soils, which you can see here at about a depth of 13 meters from the top. These are the pits, which all belong to the like 18th, 19th century occupation of the citadel. But from this level on, and particularly this one, we had evidence of an occupation here, from where also a lot of carbon dates came. And below that, the platform, a platform made with huge mud bricks, continued to a very deep level up to here when the natural soil started. You can see the picture on the right. And this picture shows you the depths. So when we reached the deepest point that we could by excavation, we did some drillings to assure that we have reached the natural ground. The radiocarbon dates, which come from the occupation levels, which you just saw before, date to this period of time. It's quite wide range, but the dates are rather consistent to the 8th and 5th or 6th century BC. Nevertheless, it was interesting to see that even in the deepest layers, this is 117A and 112, in the deepest levels, we have some ashes and remains which give a completely different radiocarbon date, as you can see here. And these are due to animal dig holes or some things which obviously from the sites and from different areas reads to the lower part of the citadel. The pottery which we recovered during the excavation corresponds to these datings. We had a lot of rather modern and pre-modern pottery from the upper layers, or the pits that you have seen, including a skeleton and a lot of human bones, testifying the many assaults on the citadel and the different military times at that time. But below, from where the mud brick started, we had no glazed pottery anymore, but rather these carinated bowls or painted vessels with a carinated, with a carination at the body, which you can see here, which can be dated to actually a time span which corresponds to the radiocarbon dates. So when we reach the natural soil at a depth of 13 meters, we have been actually a little bit lower than the outside of the citadel. I show you here now our second trench on the north face. The ruins which are visible here, the deep hole, is the leftovers of a trench that was done by the first UNESCO project in the 70s. Which had to be left abandoned in 79 due to the political developments. We decided to clear that area a little bit, and it was actually a great surprise for us to find, first of all, parts of the original tile decoration, which is well known from the Islamic period, the Timmery period, and to uncover in the end the huge gateway which linked the northern portal and access of the citadel to a garden which was located in front of it. So actually, the reason for going to that area was that there were threats of stability, because the huge towers which were built on top, you can see one of the foundations here, they started to destabilize the walls of the citadel, and it was feared that some collapse and damage might happen. So we were asked to investigate the option to consolidate and stabilize the whole buildings, because the UNESCO stabilizations were no longer stable enough. So we first excavated the whole area, found the traces of the first and second Timurid building phases of this gateway. And also some of the very few pre-Timurid finds that we have, among them a prehistoric chloride vessel, which you can see here, some slip painted pottery here, painted, black painted on buff, early Islamic pottery here in this screen, and wares which are, of course, typical then for the Ilkhanid period. You all know that Herat has a very long history, which, I mean, at least for the Islamic period, its sources, it is well attested, but it was never really archaeologically investigated. So we were very happy to found some, though a few traces, but very diagnostic sherds, in fact. The problem in that area was that it's a little bit like a trash area. So by the troops and the occupations and the palaces which were on top of this site, they threw their garbage across the wall. And so what we have beside these early finds are also later decorations from the late 19th century like this, or from the 17th, 18th century. So the gateway excavation actually gave us a long historical evidence in a way for the occupation on the citadel, but not a very well stratified one. What turned out as a second thing was that, I mean, those of you who have been to Herat or know the building history know the Timmery Tower, sorry. No, the Timmery Tower, which is kind of a hallmark of the citadel. Now, in excavating this little gateway, we found that one of the towers in this part here, the tile decoration, which is the same one as on the big and standing Timmery Tower, is still the same, and the other one just comes out here. and it has the same decoration. So along with the authorities and Department of Monuments and Sites, the municipality and all involved partners in this project, we decided to make a conservation and a rebuilding of this site, which also would serve the main and prime issue, namely to stabilize the walls and particularly this tower. This was how the gateway once have looked. The tower, which is situated on top of it, is part of a later renovation phase, which was conducted in the 70s and with further repairs in the 18th century. So in very close collaboration and with a great deal of support from Aga Khan, we went to the adventure, actually, I must say, to reconstruct the two towers to a certain extent. We have discussed in long meetings with all involved agencies and departments how to do the reconstruction in order to find a way to stabilize the upper citadel walls. It was decided to rebuild the two towers and to rebuild the glacis, which in the Timmery period enforced the citadel, and the ancient gateway which led through this gate into the citadel. So you can see here various craftsmen at work to first of all build the towers and then to redo, but clearly marked the decoration in part of the towers. Now, the situation that I described before in the plan, it looks like this: that you have the citadel here at the very north western edge of the city, and what is visible here, in fact, is a small area which is designated as a bagishar. It's a garden which is recorded already in historic sources in the 12th century, and which was directly accessible through this gate that we have excavated. And it was very interesting to see that in the later period, and as it was in the late Timurid and certainly in the Safavid period, that the citadel, the outer wall of the city went along the citadel here at this part. So then the garden was no longer in use anymore. So after having completed or going on with the work in Herat, and what you see here are some drawings from the 19th century of the gates of the citadel, which were reinforced in the 18th century, particularly in the context of the Great Game, the Persian-British Afghan problem. And these are the ruins of the citadel as they are standing today. Originally, the plan was to have some excavations along the city wall here, particularly here in this side where the old city now starts, and but it turned out not to be possible because of the dense occupation in that area. So what you see here is the original reconstruction of a mound which would have enclosed the citadel at one point. This is a reconstruction based on urban studies in the 17th and 18th, which surmises that this part of the citadel or of the city wall actually was part of the oldest Herat, an area called today as Koandas. So in order to investigate at the second place the history of Herat, we tried to get the permission to excavate this open part here. Now, this part is open because actually it's a cemetery, and hence, of course, only certain porches and parts of that area were available for excavation. We did that part of the project, again in very close collaboration with the DAFA, who sent their team there for 2 years, with a particular purpose to investigate the massive outer enforcement, which you can see here. It's a big wall which surrounds this area, preserved at certain places. And here you can see how old and modern graves encroach the city, in the outer wall of Koandas. And what you see here peeking out at the background are the the minarets of the Musalla complex already. In this part, this excavation, the French mission has cleared here a thorough way which was cut through the outer enforcement, and you can see that it's a huge layer of earthwork. Here is the section of it with some enforcement by stones. It encloses all of the Koandas area, which is, as you can see here, a mounded area. What we have seen before was this area here with this massive outer brickwork going on. Here is the cemetery, and the shrines, which you see here in the upper picture, they are at the lower part. And this lowest portion actually is this one here, the lowest portion of Koandas, which was also open. It was used as a more or less as a garbage pit. So we focus our work here on the northern part with some excavations, the investigation of the walls of Koandas, and in this part we dug a deep trench. And 2 years later, the chance turned up to make an excavation here in this area, which I will also present you. Here again, you have a little close-up, and what you see here already is the excavations by the DAFA conducted in Trench 4 here in this part. And it was really surprising to have a very similar stratigraphic evidence in a way than on the Citadel, because, for example, here in this part, you can see this is all modern dump. So it's modern, the modern garbage, which extends very deep here, which penetrates into the brick buildings. But directly underneath in these mud brick walls and bits which you can see here, we have a lot of radiocarbon dates, which are very early, which overlap in part with what we have from the Citadel, but you can see here that some of the dates are open. So it's a very strange lack of evidence from the 18th and 19th and 20th century to the prehistory. So a very similar pottery collection came from that excavation as well. This comes from the upper layers. This is Timmery and late Timmery or Safavid pottery, and of course we have a lot of modern dump there. But directly underneath, we have the same kind of pottery which we had found on the excavation in Trench 1 in Kalash Yaudin. The other trench 2, which was where we started at the lowest portion of the mount, it was about 8 meters deeper than what we have, is in fact has a very different stratigraphy. We have the upper layers on top here, and then there are some pits dug into that, and from these pits came what is very clearly recognizable as the typical pottery assemblage and also the metalwork from the late 9th, 10th, 11th century. Oops. And we even have a mold that we found from there for pottery making. So from this little trench, we have a lot of evidence which is not totally, but to a large extent missing at the Citadel of Herat, where we found it only in a very few places and a very few sherds. Now, when we were working on these two different projects, and I must add that we had to stop the survey of the Hinterland and districts of Herat in 2007 because security had declined and we were not able to move through the country anymore. We started to think about a different project because in the new city of Herat, a small museum had reopened, and this museum presented the remains of what was once the possession of a collection started by King Amanullah in the 1920s, when the first museum in Herat was established. So a little later, Aga Khan Trust for Culture realized its plan to refurbish the Citadel of Herat, which after 30 years and a lot of political turmoil was in a very bad state of conservation. And from 2008 on, they undertook the total restoration, renovation, and documentation of the Citadel of Herat. And that provided us the opportunity to work on a new museum. The museum had been moved from the new city into this building here, which suffered from damp and very bad conditions. And when the work started, so we sat together and decided that we will start to re-establish the Herat Museum in this tract here. And most fortunately, it was successful, and we started our work in 2008 as well. As you can see here, the pictures, that was the first season where we had a look at the possessions. In the meantime, we studied the old inventory books, but not many of them, of all the documents, were preserved. The museum had lost 2/3 of its possessions, and the documents were very fragmentary, I would say. It was, I don't know how I would say it now. At that time, we thought it's a very bad omen that our work in the museum started with a theft, with a robbery that happened in the museum after we had been there for 2 days. It was, I don't know how it happened, but the robbers managed to take out some fines. That was, of course, at one point an impetus to do the documentation and to do it as quickly as possible. But on the other hand, it was for sure that the refurbishment by the Aga Khan Trust would ensure that the museum in the future would be a more safer place. So it was a real good chance that we could join hands in that endeavor, and that we got the help of Aga Khan to make safe depots and to make a new exhibition. And in the end, I must say that the police and their collaboration with Interpol led to the uncovering of the stolen objects, which we just had documented. So it was good. So in the end, what turned out of that project was that we made a depot here in this part, a laboratory next to it, and that all what is in light blue were the showrooms, and the other buildings here were devoted to temporary exhibitions and cultural spaces. The Citadel was inaugurated in late 2011 as a cultural center. And here are some stores where, for example, all our finds from the excavations were stored and are still stored and kept. Here you can have a look into the laboratory, which we established there. We did that in that project in close collaboration with the Kabul National Museum and with the National Archive, who set their conservators and restorers. And we had the chance to employ the local people, and some of them stayed with us for the 5 years. Some came to Berlin to get training at the Hochschule für Technik und Wirtschaft, who was also our partner in that project in conservation. And the last picture here shows how the exhibition halls were set up. We made use of the existing glass showcases from the 1970s because there was no possibility to have new cases made, but they were okay. In addition, we made wall cases here with glass. During the 4 years, we did the documentation of the whole collection in the museum. You can see here the difference of pre and past conservation for the pottery, or also for the metal pot. So we use rather simple means which were locally available, and only some, particularly for paper conservation instruments, we brought from Germany. Now, the museum collection is a very interesting assemblage, because it combines what we have seen in a way through a loophole during our survey and during our excavations, which means we had opened windows to certain points in time. So in the museum, we found the collections that cover the periods which we only had discovered very briefly to a much larger extent, and that starts with the 3rd millennium BC objects. Now, I'm not sure if these objects come from Herat. I rather think they come from Badris, but basically the collection in the Herat Museum is a local one. It was, as I mentioned before, established in the 1920s, and there was some exchange with the Kabul Museum as the mother museum, so to say, of all of the museums in Afghanistan. But objects like these, they are from the wider region, so they can be coming from sites in Gulran near the Turkmen border, or from Badris a little bit further to the east. These are objects which are, I mean, characteristic for culture, for the Bactrian Magyana culture, which extended over southeastern Iran and Bactria. And I will show you something. I want to point out these columns which you see here. It was actually very interesting to see that, like in Pakistan, during our survey, we found many sites, particularly tombs or religious buildings, that were decorated with such columns or other archaeological objects. I will show you a picture later. What is disappointingly badly attested, both in the museum collection as well on the ground, is the link between the prehistory and the Islamic period, and even the later Islamic or Middle Islamic period. So we have very few physical evidence for, in fact, the later Achaemenid, the Hellenistic, the Kushan, or the different occupations in that area. So only some relics are there indicating that. The museum has about 900 coins left, but we have documented all of them, but they don't give a good and very rich picture. As I mentioned before, the best objects actually, they were lost, they are lost. Another very interesting surprise during the work, both in the field and then in the museum, was the discovery of a new type of painted unglazed pottery, which you can see here in the lower part. It's a fascinating pottery assemblage, which we had recovered in the survey in in the northeastern parts from Herat, like on the way to Shest Sharif in Karuk and these areas. And there are some comparisons across the border, but this area northeast of Herat certainly is, with regard to the artistic decoration and the making, which is a handmade ware, a coarse gritty handmade ware, is a very special type of ware. Whereas the collection is rich in objects which you see on the front, mostly the slip painted pottery in a variety of executions. And I suppose that the majority of these collections come from the site of Palgirt, which I have shown you before, and some other sites which are near the border to Turkmenistan, where we also have uncovered some large site dating to this 9th, 10th, 11th century periods. Knowing that Herat was one of the famous craft center during from the 10th to the 12th century, the collection which was preserved in Herat was not as rich as you can see in many international museums, but some objects are there which still are a testimony to this great past. And I just show you here two metal objects which are an example of the high standard inlay work that was carried out at that time. Another discovery is, or rediscovery, I should say, is the reassembling of a cenotaph which was scattered at various places, I must say. In the Friday Mosque of Herat, we found some pieces. In the museum, there were some pieces, and in different collections. And we were able, over some time, to bring them together, and in the end, to re-establish them in what turned out to be one of the few cenotaphs. I hope you can see it. Cenotaphs from the late 14th century. It comes from a small building to the west of Herat. It's called Fushanj. It's well known from historic sources. This is a picture which was taken by Bernard O'Kane before 1985. You can see the state, how it was preserved there. This next picture is that how we found it during our survey, and I want to point out to you the presence of these columns which I mentioned before. So they are put here on this grave to mark it. So this is a situation how it looked in 2005, and the building itself, the outside is modern. I mean, it's renovated. This is the plan. So it's a historically well-known site, and it's very interesting to see that the tiles still have their original brickwork underneath. So it was interesting for us to study it also technologically. After reassembling it, the Klaus-Peter Hase from the museum could also read the inscription and discuss with Bernard O'Kane the meaning of that. Actually, there are two further cenotaphs of this type. One is in Doha now, and one is still in place in Samarkand. So it's dated to 1378. The museum has a good collection from the post-Timmery Herat, when it was the place where the Safavid king-to-be was educated. But it went on, of course, also to the 18th century. Now, certainly for those of you which are experts in historic and Islamic Herat, Herat is mostly famous for its book art and for the big ateliers, the book ateliers who were working when Herat became the Timurid capital. It was a little bit sad to see the state of the collection of the archive in Herat. As you can see here, there is a lot of damage due to damp and insects and all kinds of diseases. And book art conservation, of course, is a very time-consuming and very difficult process. So Ruth Keller from the HTW was with us for 3 years, and the 2 people from the National Archive in Kabul and some 2 people from Herat, they assisted in selecting some of the monuments which are still in place in Herat to be preserved, paginated, and at least treated to a minimum extent. The oldest book which is in the collection of the museum is actually one of the very few prestigious books there. You can see here the book itself, this one, and interesting is the Shamsa here. It's a library stamp of the Timurid Emperor Shahrukh, but the book itself is older, and it dates back probably to the 13th century. It's a very famous Tazkirat al-Awliya from a very famous poet, and a number of other monuments, particularly Qurans, they're also there, but you can see that the books are actually in need of a long-term and sophisticated treatment. So from the great Kitab Khane in Herat, I would say that very few pieces actually remained in space, although one never knows if, for example, in the Big Mosque of Herat or at some other collections, maybe there are some books and manuscripts and paintings that still survived. So our project in Herat came to an end in 2011, respectively 2012. In 2011, the museum was opened again to the public when the Citadel was refurbished and reinstalled. The exhibition was put in place and the museum opened. We came back 1 year later to work on the depot and to make a safe storage for the objects. And in fact, at that time, the collection of the museum was constantly increasing, because not only the police confiscated a lot of illegal objects on the move to Iran or to Dubai and brought them to the museum, but also the local dealers, the antique dealers in the bazaar of Herat, they started to give their collections, particularly the pottery, the painted pottery vessels, which I have shown you before, to donate them to the museum, and they did so on the occasion of the inauguration. And so to put this exhibition on top, there also one gallery is devoted to various projects that were carried out by the Aga Khan Trust in the old city of Herat, with a conservation of many old houses and our own works and other things. So it has been a good opportunity to showcase this long history that was uncovered to the public. The Citadel of Herat has always been a very busy tourist place, I must say. Even when we worked there, it was very popular with school classes and so on, and that kept, when the museum was open, of course, the interest was there. So this project gave us the chance to put together what we found, and having presented that to you now, it is very obvious that some places, of course, some issues are missing. We don't have good evidence for some periods. We have gaps in between what the main periods of occupation are. We don't know. We haven't found in the old city evidence for like Achaemenian or post-Achaemenian, Hellenistic, Sasanian, or even Parthian or Sasanian, and also not of the early Islamic period. That is more or less a lacuna. It is very difficult to excavate in the old city. It's a densely populated place. Together with the DAFA, we investigated the building pits, which were often very deep in the old city, and we did not come across basically pre-17th century remains up to a depth of something like 8 meters or so. So to find actually a continuous evidence of the history of Herat from its earliest period, which is now, I mean, we have evidence from the first millennium BC throughout the modernity. This chapter cannot yet be written, so there are the gaps, but I think what we have established is that Herat really has a long history and was a very important place in time. Now it's up to the expert to see whether it fits with the historic evidence that, I mean, whether it was Atacuana, which is mentioned in the old records, or whether it is something else. I'm going to end now by thanking all the people who worked with this project. There were so many people and so many institutions, and it was a great chance to work with them, and we are very thankful for having had that opportunity and that chance to be there and to experience that. Thank you.